Hello, welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today. I hope you're doing well. My name is Vix and this is my channel, Goddess of Gore, where I like to talk about horror, thriller, fantasy and sci-fi books. Today I want to tell you all about the books I read last week, and at last there's some cottagecore winners. Shall we just get on with it? So, to start the week off, I read Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. This is part of my commitment reads for Around the Disc in 800 Days. Lords and Ladies is the 14th Discworld book and the 4th in the Witches of the Disc books. So, by now we pretty much have our main characters for the Witches books. That is Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Og and Magrat Garlic. And this time they have gotten themselves involved with a stone circle and some bothersome fairy folk. Not your nice elves granting wishes, being all genteel and flouncy. Oh, nay, nay. These are cunning, manipulative, bewitching elves. Handsome little devils that use glamour to hide their true identities and take over the minds of everyone they encounter. Now, at the same time, being a witch has become quite popular in Lancre, and it seems all the young women are dressing in black clothes with occult, as it is called, symbols on them and casting spells. Well, you can imagine with all that meddling with the occult, it is not going well, and Lancre is getting itself in a right old mess. This book has some amazing characters in it. Some of them is a dwarfish Lothario called Casanunda. He was hilarious. Think Puss in Boots from Shrek, but human. This was a fantastic book. I really do love the Witches books, as I'm sure I've said about a million gazillion times, and this is one of the best ones. Next I read The Hedge Witch, a novella by Cari Thomas. This was for my cottagecore themed reads, and you know what? I can't be mad at this book. It was absolutely fine. It just wasn't written for me, and I think if I was a cutesy witchy teen, I would have loved it. Unfortunately, I found it a bit boring. It was very coming of age, that kind of thing, and I also didn't realise that this was a novella counterpart to another full-length book, so it's my bad there. So the main character, Rowan, is from a long line of hedge witches. If you didn't know, a hedge witch is a solitary witch that studies and uses plants and whatnot. So Rowan, she's not a very good hedge witch, despite the long lineage. Her heart just isn't in it. She doesn't exactly fit in anywhere, not at home, not at school, and not in herself. She feels like she's just a little bit too much. She doesn't like her body, she talks too much, she gets bored easily, nothing much suits her. So she sets off from London to spend the summer with her aunt in Wales to get back to nature, as it were, and help her at her cottage. She gets bored there. She thinks her aunt is just too flaky and using her to do all of the boring work around the house. And then, in the usual grumpy to sunshine way, she suddenly, just as the summer comes to an end, she suddenly realises she's actually more than she thinks. She gets friends, she discovers she's actually good at something, and saves the little village. And now I'm describing it, it just sounds better. And then, because I thought 2 novellas equaled 1 normal sized book, I chose Thornhedge by T Kingfisher. This is a brand new release for the month, and I do talk about it in my last video, which was all about the new books coming out this month. I will link it in the description if you haven't watched it yet. Why not? So this book was so undeniably cute and cottagecore and downright lovely. Not quite on a par with Nettle and Bone, but that'll do, pig. That'll do.
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
This is a book about Toadling, and Toadling always wants to do the right things, but sometimes she really struggles to think of that right thing to do. And then she gets all confused, and sometimes she gets it wrong, and then she doesn't really know what to do to make it better again. Toadling is the absolute best little creature, and as always, I loved her and I will die for her, and I wanted to be my friend, and I wanted to come and live with me. You get the idea. I would squeeze her until she farted or popped.
Don't squeeze me, I'll fart.
So this is quite loosely based on the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale, as in there's a princess asleep in a castle and has been for thousands of years, held in a kind of stasis with the rest of the royal household, except there's quite a few different components, and this little princess is definitely a see you next Tuesday. So cut to the present, and there's a not so brave knight who comes with his sword to chop down the thorns that have grown around the castle, because there's a rumour knocking around that this royal village is cursed, and there's nothing more than this knight wants to do than to break the curse and win the adoration of the whole kingdom, except in order to do that he's going to have to go through Toadling first, and she's got one hell of a story to tell before he even meets the princess. I highly recommend T Kingfisher fantasy books. They're usually quite short, and I think they could really change people's minds about the cosy fantasy genre. Go on, you know you want to. After that, I read Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. This is for the Year of Gaiman readathon, set up by Leanna from Leanna's Library. This is something I have really enjoyed reading along with. It's really reaffirmed Neil Gaiman as a firm favourite author to me. This is also the first Gaiman book that I actually read, and I only picked it up because it was about a boy who lived in a graveyard raised by ghosts. And I've probably read this a couple of times previous to this time, and it still has the ability to capture me. I had forgotten so much about this book. I'd forgotten about his guardian, Silas, and what he is. I forgot about his best friend, Scarlet, and what happens to her at the end. So this starts as a wonderful, magical, foggy London urban story, and then it becomes an amazing friendship, found family story. But then it becomes a thriller kind of book right at the end. So it begins with a family in an ordinary house on an ordinary street in London. A man is walking through this house in the shadows and in the dark, killing every one of the members of the household until he has one left. A little baby asleep in his cot, except when he gets there, there is no baby. Only a baby shape in the blankets, because this little baby likes to wander off in the night, and it is this nocturnal activity that saves his life that night. The baby wanders to the graveyard at the top of the road and is entrusted into the care of two lovely guardians who promise his mother that they will keep him safe. And so begins the story of Nobody Owens, as he is raised and taught by the whole graveyard how to be a wonderful human. Again, this is a truly wonderful magical book that's about ghosts that aren't scary, and the importance of friends and how they're just as important as having a real family. A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. This was for my cottagecore theme reading again. So I loved this book, but this book had a little problem. I would be reading it thinking that it was set in the past, like with horse and carts and slow living and witches and magic and alchemy, and then suddenly someone had a mobile phone and cars, and this kind of like pulled me completely out of the setting I had in my head. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but it did seem really strange, like Alison the author never truly set it in a certain timeline. But it really didn't suit what I had going on in my head. So, not quite as oldie-worldy as I initially thought, but I still loved it. This book is a YA magical fantasy set in a similar world to ours, and opens with a young woman called Margaret spotting something called a halla. This is an animal of killer and destructive instincts. This animal is hunted and attempted to be killed every year in the Half Moon Festival, and this year the festival is coming to her town, and Margaret believes that if she can kill it, she will bring her mother back home. Her mother is a world-class alchemist. She hasn't been home for months, and Margaret is tired of being lonely. City boy Weston wants nothing more than to train as an alchemist and bring his family financial stability they so desperately need, but he just needs an apprenticeship, and so he comes to the mansion of Evelyn Welty to seek a new teacher that just happens to be Margaret's mum. Inside this book is acceptance and friendship and a little bit of romance and standing up to your family and calling them out. Religious and class discrimination, and this was another cottagecore win for me. And then the last book of the month was Around the Disc, book number 16, Soul Music by Terry Pratchett, and this was better than I expected. This was another death book and the third in that sub-series. So this book is about sex, drugs and rock and roll. Well, 1 out of 3 isn't bad, is it? So in the first death book, Mort, we learn that Death has an adopted daughter called Isabel. Well, this book has her daughter Susan in it, and since in the manner of all death books, Death spends most of this book having an existential crisis after the death of his daughter and her husband, and he has left the reaping business, so Susan, his granddaughter, is roped in to help from her boarding school with the rest of his team until he comes back. At this same time, this is about a young man called Impey Selin who comes to the big city to become a famous musician, but unfortunately is defeated after almost being arrested for busking without a Musicians Guild permission license. And in order to get one, he will have to do some gigs to raise money, and to book the gigs he needs a license. Whilst being kicked out of the guild, he meets his future bandmates, a troll drummer and a dwarf trumpet player, and they become the most successful band in the history of the disc when the imp's harp gets accidentally destroyed and they have to buy a second-hand guitar with extraordinary powers that might be trying to make the music immortal, living in the hearts of their millions of fans. They might need help from a certain skeleton carrying a scythe in order to destroy it. So, as well as those wonderful reads this week, I also read some of the books for my horror vlog, and I think that will be coming out next month, so I don't want to spoil that by talking about them here. You will have to keep posted for that. And let me just say, I've been reading some absolute corkers, so you'll have to subscribe, and that way you'll get a notification when it's uploaded. I can't wait to see what you think of my attempt at vlogging the experience. So that's it. That's all the books I read last week. What did you think? Have you read any of them and agree with me, or do you completely disagree and think I'm off my chain? What am I even thinking? Let me know in the comments. Or have you read something truly exceptional and think I'll enjoy it too? I can't wait to hear from you. As always, don't forget to like the video if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already and want to hang around with me for a little bit longer. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate everyone who stops by and gives up their time to be here. I really do appreciate you. I will leave you, as always, with a favourite quote from one of the books I read last week. He was surprised when he hit the floor, but he did not cry out. If you cried out, they came and put you back in your cot. Make some good book choices this week, my friends, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until next time, bye-bye.